Good afternoon and welcome to the monthly Central U.S. Climate Outlook. My name is John Ives with the National Weather Service, Central Region Headquarters in Kansas City. I will be today's moderator. Before we begin our introduction, we have just one housekeeping item. Please mute your line using *6 so we may keep the line clear so everyone may hear. Thank you. Our speaker today is Dr. Dennis Toddy from the South Dakota State University. And he'll be talking about the current climate and drought situation that we have ongoing. And following the briefing, we will open up the lines to take questions. Now let's turn it over to Dennis. Dennis?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a wonderful spring day here in South Dakota and across much of the Plains area, so good to be with you. Let's dive right in. We've got an awful lot to talk about. Am I coming through okay from a volume standpoint?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. The first picture here is from my own state again with some of the issues that we chatted about in the pre-call, and something that's been across the whole basin is the fire issue. This is actually from Wind Cave National Park on the edge of the Black Hills with the fire that is still ongoing.
Hello, I'm here on the line. I'm checking in.
John, you'll have to mute everybody, I think.
Okay, just a moment.
Dennis, you'll have to tune in again.
Yep. Okay, can you hear me, John?
I sure can. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Sorry about the delay there, folks. We'll dive back in here. Just a reminder, this is a collaboration activity among NOAA and various regional partners, state climatologists, regional climate centers, the National Drought Mitigation Center, and USDA. Our next drought webinar will be on May 21st. We will, unless conditions worsen and warrant, we will plan on still keeping them at every month. If conditions would require it, we will go to more frequent updates. And we'll have to hold questions until the end. Our agenda for today is we'll do a review of current conditions, some of the issues, and then we'll dive into some of the impacts in our area, across the Corn Belt, wheat area, et cetera. And then we'll do some looking at the outlooks and talking about El Nino. Another fire picture from the University of Mary on the edge of Bismarck, where they had to evacuate people from campus because of a grass fire, and they actually had to call Black Hawk helicopters in to fight on this one. So, kind of a review of our current situation. First thing, March temperatures across the country with statewide rankings. You can see that the western part of our area, most of the plains, are coming in above or much above average for March temperatures, ranking in the top, most of our western states in the top 10 warmest Marches on record. Not as warm as 2012, but still quite on the warm side. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa on the warm side. As you get over to our eastern area, Ohio, Indiana, you see coming in on the cool side. And again, this has been keeping with a clear ridge trough pattern, that ridge of high pressure that has been over the western U.S., that has been a pretty semi-permanent feature for some period of time, causing the jet to move up into Canada. So we're getting lots of higher pressure, but then bringing that colder air down over the Great Lakes in the eastern part of the U.S. has been impacting the eastern part of the U.S. from a cold and snow standpoint, where most of our area has been on the warm side. So, and all that western U.S. being quite warm for the last month. If we jump ahead to March, from a precipitation standpoint, quite a different story here. You can see several of our states, with Nebraska and South Dakota leading the way, Iowa right behind as the second to third driest on record. Wyoming and the fifth driest on record for the month of March, and then Wisconsin and Michigan being 11 and 8 respectively. So quite dry conditions with that Canadian air coming in, really not a lot of moisture to deal with. which is the part of the pattern that has been much more active is what we call the southern stream, or the storm track across the southern part of the U.S., where you see Texas, Arizona on the very much wet side, even impacting parts of southern parts of our area, Missouri into Indiana and Kentucky, being very wet in the eastern part of the Corn Belt, impacting ag, which we'll talk about as we go along here. I want to step back just a little bit farther on the way of precipitation, because this has an additional impact to our current drought conditions and some of the ag issues related. On the upper left-hand side, the precipitation ranks state by state for January through March, and on the lower right-hand side, going back to the water year, or October, and really some similar patterns going on here. The January through March time period, South Dakota leading the way as the driest on record, and again, some of our neighbors coming in the top 10 there also. And that same area, not quite driest on record, but still top 10 in the Dakotas and Minnesota, lining up very well with some of the drought conditions that we'll show you as we get to the drought monitor here. Moving on, if I can get the next slide to, okay, here we go. Getting my slides to advance here. Looking at temperatures for our most recent 30 days now. In the upper left-hand side, the average temperatures across the region, ranging from Montana up here, the Dakotas, Iowa, Missouri, Indiana. So cold up around the Great Lakes area, warmer down to the south. Probably more importantly, the departure from normal, departure from average temperatures. Most of the plains areas in the range of 4 to 8 degrees above average for the last 30 days. The only place really colder than average is in the upper peninsula of Michigan and over the main part of Michigan. The impact it's having in those areas is slowed down some of the phenology in those where Jeff Andreessen, their state climatologist, mentioned they're about 7 to 10 days behind phenologically in those areas. The warmer temperatures have helped from an ag issue across much of the plains, getting conditions closer to being able to start planting or starting planting small grains in some cases. So kind of a mixed bag of what's going on right now. Looking at the soil moisture, this is again, a combination of models from the NLDAS system, a combination of soil moisture models, since we have no one model that does exactly, trying to get an assessment, and this is a general idea of what conditions are like. The scale is on the bottom is in millimeters, so you divide by 25 to get inches. So clearly showing the upper plains area and into the central plains and even parts of Iowa and Illinois being several inches below average for this point in the year, which does have some impact. Southern Minnesota being the biggest area of behind. Contrasted with a wet area along the Ohio Valley, which we'll talk a bit more about here in just a second, with some heavier rainfalls and actually some heavier snows that go back the last couple months. And then the eastern Dakotas to Wyoming and Montana, where they had wetter conditions late last summer and last fall, actually wet up the soils. So we did get some reports of them fighting fires and having problems fighting fires in mud out in Montana. Even in northwestern South Dakota, our own state fire meteorologist was on a large fire in the northwest part of the state, and he said there's water around, it's just the surface is very dry. So this is what is driving some of the issues from an ag perspective, is how dry are the soils and how much are we going to need to be able to get caught up or recover on some of these deficits. Okay, combining those into the U.S. Drought Monitor, just released this morning, where we have now covered a good portion of the upper plains in D1 or D0, also the upper Midwest, over to the Great Lakes in D0, ongoing dryness issues down into Nebraska, Kansas, and even into the southern plains with some of the longer-term issues. They have improved a bit because of the precipitation in the southern stream with storm track along there, but not eliminated some large parts of it, and obviously the part everybody knows about with the ongoing issues in California. Just some numbers right now from a coverage standpoint. Minnesota is 92% covered by D1 conditions, South Dakota 67%, Kansas is 68% with 25% of it, and of Kansas in D2 or worse. So some ongoing drought issues, and then potentially developing one if we're not able to get some soil moisture or get some precipitation to help our soil moisture situation. Okay, moving on to some of our impacts. First, looking at fire, which we've hinted at already. Not always related to drought, because fires are not uncommon in the springtime because of the vegetation not having greened up. It's cured, dried over the winter time. So we do expect fires, but because of the very dry conditions, the lack of green up yet, and dryness going back to last fall, it's kind of exacerbated the conditions here. So lots of dry surfaces. We have fires burning very quickly, taking off very quickly. We have areas that have had good growth for the last couple of years, so there's lots of vegetation to burn. And some of the places in the Dakotas, and I think even part of Montana, typically the grasses that grow during the previous year are knocked down by snows during the wintertime. A lot of those places we didn't have very much snow this year to knock the vegetation down, and that standing cured vegetation also burns very differently and much more quickly. Lots of red flag warnings over the area because of dry conditions and windy conditions, and caused rapidly spreading and burning fires. In fact, I-29 in north of Grand Forks, North Dakota, was closed yesterday because of blowing smoke and dust. So lots of fire issues going on. Just grabbed a couple images from USDA Forest Service, large fire incidents in the upper left-hand side, and you can see ones in Minnesota, South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, also a number down in Oklahoma and even Missouri. And then on the right-hand side, this is another product from yesterday with the red dots being fire starts, I assume smaller starts, and then the red flag warnings that were going on yesterday. So it's not only the plains, even over into the eastern part of the Corn Belt and Great Lakes, we're getting lots of fire starts. Though in those cases, they generally have been smaller and been able to be contained into a few hundred acres. So we've had several places that have burned several square miles in parts of the Dakotas. Great Lakes, from the Great Lakes standpoint, some interesting issues going on there. There's been still a 20% ice coverage on the lakes, which is, I don't think as bad as last year, but still significantly higher than most times for this year. Generally warmer conditions, warmer lake temperatures than last year. This is going to be a bit of an impact in the region for a period of time, and some first ships are passing through. Reports that the first ship reaching Duluth had come through. On the left-hand side, we have we have Lake Michigan on the bottom, Lake Superior on the top, with average water temperature. You can see the red line on those that have been running a bit below average, but it has made recent inroads closer to average for both of those lakes. And then Lake Huron, the black line is 2015 compared to the last 5 years, so a little on the low side, but starting to make some inroads. So we're starting to improve on the Great Lakes area. Looking at the Missouri River system, this is a plot from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on the mountain snowpack water content on the left above Fort Peck, and on the right, Fort Peck to Garrison, really kind of telling of what has happened over the last couple months. You see that during the first part of winter, up to about February, the blue area was tracking right along with the red line, which is close to average. But then in the middle of February and subsequent months, the snowpack accumulation really tailed off, and you can see that we went from close to average to right now, it's 72% above Fort Peck and 78% above Garrison. And then there was very little runoff from the plain snowpack, so we're getting our inflows into the Missouri River have dropped off appreciably. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will be doing more work and more talking about that over the next couple of weeks. From the North Platte and South Platte, you can see similar stories. The South Platte, not quite as bad. They're about 81%. North Platte at about 72%. So we are going to have some limited inflows in the Missouri River system. Looking at 7-day average stream flow, these are USGS gauges all across the country. Basically, the green areas are in the 25th to 75th percentile, somewhere in the middle of the distribution. If you get into the tans and browns, these are places that stream flows are getting quite low compared to average, and you can see some of our drought places make sense where you can see those dots. Eastern North Dakota, Minnesota showing up quite well. Parts of Iowa, central Illinois, and northern Indiana into southern Michigan as dry areas, and then Nebraska down to Kansas. Some areas above average from a stream flow standpoint out towards the mountains. Some of that has been because of some of the warmer temperatures, I believe, causing some quicker stream flows in those areas. So as the snow melts off, we're expecting those to drop back off as time goes along. Okay, looking more at the ag issues, let's look at our wheat conditions. There's lots going on with wheat that I've heard comments from in various email conversations this week. Just a reminder of where our wheat areas are, our winter wheat areas, and the red hatching showing drought conditions, at least D1 conditions. So lots of our winter wheat areas, especially ones that we're most concerned about, are covered by some kind of drought. That has been part of an impact for wheat as we're going along, but that's not the only one. There's a lot of other ones. So looking at winter wheat conditions, the figure is from a week ago from the World Agricultural Outlook Board, and plots out the percent of winter wheat that is in good to excellent condition. And you can see in our prime states there, South Dakota down to Kansas, only 30 to 34% or so of the winter wheat was in good to excellent condition as of last week. Other states in the eastern part of the region were kind of in the middle of the road, not too much off comparatively. But as of this week, in the April 12 report, I didn't have a plot, but I put some of the data there at the bottom. You can see that the percent of winter wheat in poor to very poor condition, Nebraska 30%, Kansas 28%, South Dakota 27%, Oklahoma 26%. So lots of winter wheat having some problems. Actually, the winter wheat status is better than last year, but there still are lots of problems. There are multiple wheat issues, which we'll talk about here. Initially, the dry fall. We talked a little bit about the dry fall last year. In South Dakota, there was winter wheat that did not emerge. That was an initial problem. Nebraska, western Nebraska, was actually wet in September, slowed winter wheat planting. Then dry conditions in October, and then the November sharp turn to cold temperatures hit it very well in that area. There was some winter kill. We had some dormancy break on winter wheat in areas, and then cold afterward. Then the dry spring has come along here, and that's part of what we're showing on the right-hand side here. This is a winter wheat plot. Yes, that is winter wheat, just west of Brookings at a research farm near Volga, South Dakota, by our extension plant pathologist, indicating multiple issues: dryness, some winter kill, really having problems. And then to top it off, down in Kansas, there was freeze damage. Winter wheat had started to grow, and temperatures fell into the 20s, damaging it. There did seem to be some varietal differences, and there is obviously going to be yield loss in a lot of places, and we're getting reports of crop insurance settlements already for a number of these areas. So lots of still to be found out with winter wheat. Some overall ag activity beyond winter wheat. Those areas we talked about in the western or in the eastern corn belts, southern Indiana, southern Illinois, Kentucky, have been quite wet, has kind of slowed activity there. We would expect corn planting to be going on by this point. As of a couple days ago, there was still not much moving in that area. Potentially some more in the northern parts of those states that was not as wet. In the drier areas, there's been a positive move because soil temperatures have warmed up a bit more. There's been drier soils, and there's more field access. That's been a common problem, especially in the Dakotas and parts of Minnesota in recent years. So there's been earlier activity there, particularly planting of small grains, oats, spring wheat in Nebraska and South Dakota, and then other field work, prep work going on. Corn, I note down at the bottom, corn planting as of the NASS report on Monday was at 2%, slightly behind the 5% average, but it seems like activity is starting to pick up. I personally saw 3 people out last night between Brookings and Sioux Falls, and oddly enough, it wasn't going on during the daytime. They were waiting until the evening when wind started to die down, and you had higher humidity, so they didn't set off any fires by hitting a rock just by accident or whatever. There was also reports from Jeff Andreessen in Michigan about some winter kill on peaches, blueberries, and vinifera grapes. They came about in February. They hadn't broken dormancy yet. It was just flat out cold enough that there was some damage to these in their state. So they're still assessing that right now. From a soil temperature standpoint, I apologize for the messiness here. We have to work on getting a better soil temperature map across our region. On the left-hand side, soil temperatures in the plains, mainly in the 50s, except for parts of northern North Dakota where we're still in the 40s. On the right-hand side, you can see most of the main part of the Corn Belt is in green, running in the 50s, upper 50s to lower 50s, so appropriate for corn planting to be starting. You could have some people waiting a little bit because of the dry conditions, or potentially looking at the cold temperatures next week and wanting to hold off a little bit so that seed is not sitting in cold ground. So, but I will expect to see more reporting of corn planting going on next week. Related to that, the last 30, 60 days of precipitation, some of those impacts again. On the left-hand side, the last 30 days precipitation, looking at less than an inch of precipitation over most of the plain states, up to 2 to 3 inches in parts of northern Iowa to southern Wisconsin, and then you can see that wet area along the Ohio Valley. And on the right-hand side, the last 60 days, this is a report that came out from folks in Kentucky. We're looking at that purplish area in the middle of Kentucky is over 20 inches of precipitation in the last 60 days. So very, very wet conditions impacting there and slowing down some agricultural activity. Okay, jumping ahead to the outlooks. We're going to talk about the 7-day precip outlook, 8 to 14-day, the 30, the 90-day. We'll give you a little more outlook on summer and talk about El Nino and some of the issues coming up here. First off, the 7-day QPF, the quantitative precipitation forecast, just how much of the model is projecting precipitation to occur in the next week. And you can see that there is a possibility for some assistance in the plains here from Wyoming through Wyoming through Nebraska and northern Kansas, possibly a couple inches of precipitation coming, which would be very welcomed and really would probably not slow down ag activity a great deal because of the dry soil conditions. Even some of the northern areas that are in the D1 are expecting a potential for 1 inch of precipitation. That would be beneficial, and potential for some more rain on the already wet areas down in the southern areas. So the wet with the cool temperatures coming up, which we'll talk about here, could slow down planting activity. Here's the 8 to 14-day outlook. Temperature on the left-hand side, precipitation on the right-hand side. So if these areas do get wet, especially those areas that are quite wet, we could see a slowdown in overall ag activity because we're expecting a good chance, at least through next week, of below average temperatures. Probably wouldn't be surprised to see some frost conditions occur in certain areas, but the areas that will be wet, we're not going to get a whole lot of heat on top of them. On the right-hand side, the below normal chances for precipitation across the Dakotas over into Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin. If we don't get much precipitation this weekend, it looks like we're not going to get much benefit going on. The cool temperatures will help us a little bit, but we do need to get some rainfall on this region to at least help out initial planting and seeds that are in the ground and help with rangeland conditions also. Far southern parts of our region have a better chance of precipitation, again with that idea of the southern stream being active. Okay, newly released this morning, the May temperature and precipitation outlook. Most of our region is the EC equal chances for temperature, slight chances for below normal over this northern and eastern Great Lakes area, largely due to the impact of the colder water temperatures, which I mentioned. Not a strong impact here, but a little bit. Also, the parts of Kansas catch the below average temperatures, and the far western areas with this ridge of high pressure over the west likely to stay in, is likely going to stay in that warm area. CPC has been very consistent with this precipitation outlook on the right-hand side, where the western southern plains and on up into the Rockies, the computer models and other pieces have been pointing out to a likely above average chances for precipitation in that area. So it would start giving some benefit to our Colorado, Wyoming, and Western Plains parts of our area. There's been consistent message within some of the computer models about dryness over the Great Lakes. Not a strong chance, but they've been holding that in going on into May. You see the chunk of D1 over the Dakotas and Minnesota is EC equal chances. So some better chance for improvement in those areas. The 3-month outlook looks very similar to the 30-day with some slight deviations. Again, warmest temperatures likely in the western part of our region and over the western U.S. A little part of Kansas catching that cooler than average, but the rest of the area equal chances for below or above average temperatures. On the right-hand side, precipitation, that above average chances for precip actually enlarges to capture Montana down to Colorado and even western parts of South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas. And that area of dryness over the Great Lakes does hang in. So we'll have to keep an eye on worsening conditions in that area. Just skip ahead one more from a July through September standpoint. We're going to talk about El Nino next because El Nino has been capturing a lot of attention because of the way it's been acting. But the outlook for July through September really picking up on that El Nino and taking El Nino, what El Nino means for late summer and showing the warm areas staying on the western U.S., but a small area in Iowa and Illinois with below average temperatures with a higher likelihood in the latter part of summer. And then that area of wetness actually is extended a little bit more towards the Corn Belt as we go along, not only because of what the computer models are saying, but because of what's expected to go on with El Nino. We'll talk about that here in just a second. When you combine those and what the drought outlook says for now through the end of July, what it's saying for us is kind of a mixed bag of numbers. Just a reminder how to interpret this. Basically, what it's saying is, what is the drought condition going to be on July 31 compared to what it is now? So the main core of the D1 over the north central states is projected to persist. Although what I expect to have happen is we're going to see some worsening in that drought area with then chances for getting better as we get better chances for precip later in the spring. That area of dryness over the Great Lakes, they're projecting some drought development to occur. That is already D0. They're projecting some D1 to occur in there. The good news is in the southern part of our area, Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado, which have had some ongoing longer-term drought issues, assuming those outlooks for precipitation verify, that would show improvement in those areas, and that is reflected here either removal, which is in the greenish area, or improvement, which is in the grayish area. So we do have some opportunities for improvement in that region. Okay, looking at what's happening with El Nino. We've got two animations going on here. So the left-hand side is the sea surface temperatures in the Pacific Ocean. On the left-hand side down here is Australia. On the right-hand side, South America and Mexico. You can see the El Nino that we've been telling you was not much of an issue. Finally fooled us in the last month, 6 weeks or so. You see development of warmer than average sea surface temperatures here over this time period. And then if we're looking at the same area but what is happening at depth, you see this brownish area at depth indicating there's very warm sea surface temperatures below the surface. So the folks at Climate Prediction Center put us on to an El Nino advisory. We are in an El Nino and likely to continue. This large amount of subsurface water is likely to enhance this probability of El Nino and keep it going. And also some comments from the Climate Prediction Center where the atmosphere is acting much more like an El Nino now. If we saw this similar picture a year ago, but it didn't stick around with us. The indications are that the atmosphere is acting more like an El Nino right now. That's why CPC is sticking to that higher probability. And here we show that probability. These are the probabilities of El Nino in the red bar, green neutral conditions, and blue La Nina for the 3-month periods going from right now out to almost a year from now. You sum these three bars, it adds up to 100%. And the climatological probabilities are the lines. So you can see that we have much higher than climatological probabilities for El Nino, with a 60 to 70% chance of El Nino continuing on throughout the year. Lesser chances as we get later in the year, but a pretty good chance of it continuing through the summertime. That is why the outlooks took into account what summertime El Ninos can mean and what they can do for us into their outlooks. Basically, from an overall standpoint, looking at cropping conditions, we tend to have better cropping years for corn and beans during summertime El Nino events. We tend to not be wet or not be dry, and we tend not to be hot overall during summertime El Nino. So that's something we want to watch as we're going along. Okay, summary of our conditions here. Mostly warmer than average over the last 30 days, except for Michigan. Generally drier conditions over most of the area, except for those wetter areas in the eastern corn belts. Soil temperatures are generally pretty good and appropriate for what's going on right now. I didn't show you anything on frost depth conditions. Did get a report from Minnesota indicating that on the St. Paul campus, their frost had finally gone out of the ground. Further north, they still do have some frost at depth and some frozen lakes in northern Minnesota. Soil moisture's obviously pretty dry, except for those wetter areas in the east, and then subsurface areas out in Wyoming, Montana, where we still have some carryover moisture from the fall. Winter wheat overall is better condition than last year, but still mounting losses because of the multiple effects we talked about. Early progress on some small grain planting, and corn progress is a little early, a little lower than expected this time of year, but we're just going to start seeing some of that move along, especially if we don't get much precipitation out of this event. From an outlook standpoint, we are in an El Nino advisory, as I mentioned, impacting the summer outlook. Temperatures warmer than average, likely farther in the far western part of our area in the western U.S. There's a small pocket of cooler in that late summer period in Iowa, Illinois. Wetter conditions likely throughout much of the plains area, equal chances elsewhere, except for the Great Lakes, where there are a couple pockets of dryness, which is more likely. Drought conditions will likely slightly worsen over the northern plains area before evening out or improving, likely because of our drier conditions in the 8 to 14 day. The mounting losses will probably increase the drought conditions a little bit before we start getting a little bit better. Improving drought conditions are likely in the central plains, and then the potential for developing drought around the Great Lakes areas and those already dry areas. Our spring flood potential, I didn't address this earlier. Kevin Lau is not on the phone. Basically, across much of the western parts of the area, there's very limited from a snow melt or whatever. There's very limited flood possibilities. There's the typical convective possibilities in the lower Missouri Basin area when we have thunderstorm activity. There's still a little bit of potential in the eastern parts, but not too much at this point. And Missouri River inflows are dropping. The Corps of Engineers will be doing some more talking about that. So, again, various websites. Thank yous to our partners, Regional Climate Centers, National Drought Mitigation Center, NOAA for hosting. And thank you. And we'll take any questions. We have a few folks on board who are able to answer questions also. So, John, let's turn it over and start taking people's questions.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. And we will now open up the question and answer period. Please use *6 to unmute your line before asking your question. And then when you're finished speaking, please use *6 to mute your line. Our panelists today are, of course, Dennis Toddy was our presenter. And also we have Doug Cluck, who's on the line from NOAA, and also Kevin Grody from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So let's go to questions. Remember, *6 to unmute your line. Please go ahead.
Yes, this is Bryce Anderson from DTN. And regarding the prospects for corn yields for this year, it appears, just in looking back to the 1950s, that summers with El Nino have about a 50-50 chance of having much above normal or much above trend line yields. From the way things are setting up for this year, would you buy into that? Would you agree that that's a ballpark possibility for corn yields this year, Dennis?
Bryce, you were saying that El Niños were 50-50 for below or above. Is that what you were saying?
50-50 for above trend line.
Okay.
And some of those years were much above, actually,
Okay.
as you know.
Yeah, I'm leaning towards some above trend. I'm not going to project a specific number.
Right.
I would at least go a few bushels above trend line this year. That's making some assumptions. Partially that we don't have major drought issues going on in the main part of the Corn Belt yet. That the precipitation will come and overcome that issue, and we'll get things planted in a reasonable situation. And that the drought up here is not too serious to overcome the initial planting. But I'd still lean towards a little bit above trend going on this year also.
Okay, thank you.
This is Nancy. Can you hear me?
Hi, Nancy.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so two questions. When you talked about the effect of snowpack on grass fires, is that lack of snow cover, does that extend down to Nebraska? Do you happen to know? And then the other question was going to be, can you point out where the so-called blob is at in the Pacific in relation to the El Nino map that you had, and then if that continues to manifest itself, how would that affect us here? Those are my questions. Thank you very much.
From the Nebraska standpoint, I don't remember how much snow there was in Nebraska. I would assume you probably had some of the similar situations down there where you have grass that was not knocked down by the snowfall. I had not heard reports of it specifically down there, but I'm sure it probably is an issue. And to your second question, this is a reference, Nancy was on a NOAA call this morning where there was a mention of the blob of warm water. We can only see a part of it here, but part of the discussion this morning on the NOAA call was this persistence of very much warmer than average water off the west coast of the U.S. that is kind of a chicken and egg related to that ridge of high pressure we talked about out there, but is directly related to the warmer than average conditions that are projected. We can kind of see just the southern edge of it here, but that does extend on up along much of the west coast and out some distance from the coast of that warmer than average water that has been hanging out there for 2 or 3 years now going on.
And did you have any idea how that is affecting us?
Well, it is contributing to that ridge of high pressure that has been over the west coast, pushing the jet up into Canada. And as we talked about this morning, on the backside of that ridge, when the jet is coming down out of Canada, so bringing that cold air over us, and we saw that throughout much of this winter, where the cold came down really varied over time. Most of this year, as compared to the winter to last winter, the cold tended to stay over the Great Lakes and to the east, so that the Great Lakes into the eastern U.S. Got a lot more of that cold, and then was able to tap into moisture and produced all the snowfall out there. We didn't get as much of the cold, but those systems coming out of Canada were not able to tap into any moisture on a pretty regular basis. So the dryness that started last fall stayed with us throughout most of the winter, except for a couple breaks where we had a couple storm systems coming through. But those storms then, as they came across, were able to dive into the southern plains where they were able to tap into moisture and then get the more southern stream precipitation that I showed there from the southern Mississippi Valley and Ohio Valley. That's the biggest impact over us, is helping contribute to the dry conditions going on.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Or do any of the panelists have contributions or additional comments they would like to chime in with?
Am I up? Can I be heard?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. This is Stuart Moss out of Fremont County, southwest Iowa. I'm wondering if any of you folks can or have given any thought to the probabilities of heavier weather in the tornado belt, tornado alley for this summer, the spring and summer.
About the likelihood of it occurring?
Yeah, the probabilities being more or less than average for, experiencing tornadoes.
Sure. This has come up a couple times recently, partially because of the slow onset of the severe weather season this year. There have been fewer tornadoes and a delayed onset. I know there has been some work relating El Nino conditions to severe weather, and I don't remember if any of my partners remember this. It seemed like there had been some discussions about El Ninos maybe suppressing severe weather a bit, although I'm not confident in that. I know there's been some work related to that. But certainly we've had a later onset of some of the severe weather season going on this year, though there have been a few high-profile cases, in Oklahoma already and northern Illinois with some bigger tornadoes going on. I don't know, Doug or John, do you remember either of those on El Nino?
Sure. Actually, I'm looking at something here right now, and it's funny how these things work, but it did have a slow start, and actually for the months of March, April, May, it tended to be somewhat suppressed up in Iowa, but more so as you went south into Kansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma, and Arkansas, and Texas. So it doesn't tell us anything about the intensity, but it does tell us something about that. Also, for that same period, for March, April, May, and since we're already getting there, there is some signal that shows also that tornado activity would be somewhat suppressed. But it follows pretty much with the hail. But same for Iowa, and then a little more in eastern Kansas, a little more suppression, also western Missouri and on south. So yes, a little bit, but I wouldn't take that to just this like it leans a little bit to the lesser amounts.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Stuart, it only takes one big one to hit one city, and it's a really bad year.
Oh yes. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And Stuart, part of our problem too is I get this question a lot about changes in severe weather activity. Whereas we have over 100 years worth of daily temperature and precipitation records, our records for severe weather are beyond about the last 30, 40 years are really not that good. So whereas we can go back and look at what temperature and precipitation were like in El Ninos 50, 60, 80 years ago, we can't quite do that for severe weather. So we're a little more limited on the total data set we're working
with. Very good. Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Any last-minute questions?
Feel free.
Okay, great. Thank you for joining us today for our monthly Central U.S. Climate Outlook and looking at drought, particularly right now. We would like to extend an invitation to you to join us on our next webinar, and that'll be on May 21st at the same time, same number, and same PIN code. Until then, for Dennis Toddy and our panelists today, have a good day. Bye-bye.